Real talk, raw truth, raging hearts. Welcome to From the Minds of Raging Brats. Like, share, and subscribe.
Hi, I'm Heather. Welcome back to From the Minds of Raging Brats.
I'm Ashley. How are you doing this week?
Emotional, kind of all over the place. It's getting close to when things get really rocky emotionally for me, so I'm hanging in there though.
Yeah, it is definitely that time of year for I think a lot of people.
Yeah, it definitely is hitting a lot of people. I see that online, out in public. Like I hear it a lot, but I also know that for those that don't understand, that don't go through there, it doesn't resonate the same way. It sits heavy on your chest.
Yeah, definitely agree.
This week, though, before we get into anything or get sidetracked on anything light, this week is going to be something I want to be really clear and precise with language and addressing, because this episode is not meant to be comfortable. It's not meant to be background noise. It is not meant to be something you half listen to while you're doing something else. This one is one of those conversations that requires you actually be present. Because today we're not talking about a crime. We're not talking about punishment. We're not even talking about guilt. We're talking about how language is used to decide whether responsibility exists at all.
Yes.
And honestly, that really matters more than people realize.
I think you're right that a lot of people don't realize that, but a lawyer's best friend is language. Because they can word something 100 different ways, and even though they're saying the same thing, it's going to have a different meaning to you or sound different to you, depending on how they put something. And they use that to their advantage.
And that's kind of the emphasis for this episode. So I'm going to ask you right now to slow your body down just a little bit, unclench your jaw, drop your shoulders, because if you rush this conversation, you will miss the part where it clicks. And before we go any further, ask yourself this honestly. When you hear the phrase death by misadventure, what do you picture? For those of you at home, do you picture blame or do you picture inevitability? Sit with that for a minute. Then let us know in the comments what you think. This episode is going to have a lot of sit with moments, a lot of introspective questions. Fill the comments with your answers or don't. But really take the information in. So how I ended up here specifically, I did not set out to make this episode. It was not on my mind for this week. And in fact, with everything that dropped yesterday, I really had a different angle. But this will lead up into next week with everything that dropped. And honestly, this is where the language comes in and why language is so important. This wasn't something I planned weeks in advance. It wasn't on a content calendar. It wasn't a strategic choice. This episode happened because I watched a true story and felt that very specific, very familiar sensation of something being not quite right, off. You know that feeling where you hear a conclusion and your body reacts before your brain catches up? That feeling of, no, that doesn't sit right. The phrase that triggered it was simple: death by misadventure. At first, it sounded sad, neutral, unavoidable. But the more details that were given, the more that phrase started to feel like a blanket being pulled over something sharp. So, my next audience question. Have you ever had that moment where something is labeled in a way that makes it feel finished, even though you're not finished thinking about it? And if you have answers to these questions too, Ashley, you can feel free to chime in with that.
Yes, of course.
But let's walk through the situation slowly, because speed is where people miss the problem. A group of friends were at a party. They were several stories up on a building with an elevated outdoor space. Throughout the night, people in the group were pranking each other. Physical jokes, startle-based humor, pushing boundaries. One person in the group did not find it funny. Instead of escalating, instead of retaliating, instead of making a scene, he did something most of us would consider mature. He opted out. He separated himself from the group and said no thanks. He avoided them. He removed himself from the situation. He went outside to get space.
He did everything right, in other words.
The entire night, every minute of it is video recorded. So none of this is speculation. He told them he wasn't comfortable pranking. He stood off to the side while they were doing that and eventually removed himself to the outside completely. There was not intoxication in this situation. Even though they were at a party and there was a group of college kids, adults, but as the thing kept saying, college-age kids. They had a pitcher of beer between them and sodas. That's it. So no intoxication. Yeah. So there's no intoxication level contributed to this behavior. There is video showing all of this. Him distancing himself, him standing alone, another person approaching him from behind, and that person pushing him. Not hard. That doesn't matter. But that doesn't matter here. The conditions were slick. He was near the ledge. He fell several stories and died.
Can you imagine the freaking terror?
You wouldn't have very long to process it because the witness on the ground said it was like 2.5 to 3 seconds from the time he fell from the 4th story and impacted. But the ruling was death by misadventure, a sudden action in a hazardous position.
No. See, that's that tricky lawyer language again.
Those of you at home, when you hear that description, what disappears? Is it the other person? Is it the push? Is it the choice? Here's something we don't talk about enough. Language doesn't just describe reality. It creates the frame for how we are allowed to respond to it. When something is called an accident, a tragedy, a misadventure, your brain is subtly told this is not a situation where accountability belongs.
And when I personally hear any of those phrases, like for me, it almost puts almost a blame on the other person. Like they were doing something adventurous and had a mishap. They were doing something and an accident happened. Somebody else did something to somebody else that took their life.
Yeah, it's putting the blame on the victim. Yes.
Gross.
That doesn't mean someone is evil. It doesn't mean someone intended harm. It means responsibility has been blurred. And once responsibility is blurred, the conversation stops. So the next question for those of you at home, think about the last time you heard something described as just an accident. Did you feel invited to ask questions or discouraged from asking them?
Yeah, of course. If you're already told who to blame, why would you think about the blame that others should be taking?
Well, and here's the thing. What death by misadventure is supposed to mean Let's get precise because precision is where clarity lives. Traditionally, death by misadventure applies when someone dies as a result of their own actions, personal misjudgment, environmental risk, or uncontrollable bad luck without another person intervening.
Yeah, I think of somebody that does like extreme rock like climbing out in the middle of nowhere where everybody told them not to go. That's what I think of when I think of misadventure.
That is actually one of the examples I have. A climber misjudges a hold and falls. A hiker is struck by lightning. A swimmer underestimates the current. A recreational activity turns fatal due to personal error. These situations share one critical feature. They are self-contained. No one pushed, no one interfered, no one introduced force. Audience, when you think of misadventure, do you imagine someone else's hands involved? Or only the environment and the individual? Where the definition starts to break, now let's take that definition and apply it to the case we're talking about. Was the environment hazardous? Yes. Was the person near a ledge? Yes. But here's the question that actually matters. Would the death have occurred without someone else's action? Because if the answer is no, which in this case the answer would have been no, then misadventure no longer fits.
Mm-hmm.
The moment another person introduces force, the event is no longer self-contained. And pretending it is doesn't make it true.
Exactly. We have a legal term for this. When you accidentally kill somebody or you do something that could have been harmful but you did not intend death, it's manslaughter. We have a term for this, and for them to try and label it as anything else is a warped justice.
We're going to talk more about that as we get down further because you're right, but also maybe not. And I'll explain why. At what point does an accident stop being an accident and start being a consequence? The defense that quietly undermines itself. One of the arguments often implied in cases like this one, well, the victim was already in a dangerous position. And I really want to stop right there for a minute because that sentence contains its own contradiction.
Yes.
If someone is already in danger, why the fuck would you add force? Why the fuck would you try to startle them?
Yes.
If the conditions are already risky, why would you introduce another variable? That argument does not reduce responsibility. It confirms recklessness.
I definitely agree.
So, audience, if danger already exists, does adding to it make you less responsible or more?
I feel like if we had a just justice system, this should be a pretty clear answer. But you know,
this is where people usually rush to intent. They didn't mean to kill him. It was just a prank. They didn't think it would happen. But intent is not the standard we use anywhere else.
Anywhere. Like, I'm sorry, when you said that, and I am sorry this might be a trigger for some of the audience, but it really reminds me of babies that end up with SBS. And the mom's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I didn't know, I was just so tired. Like, it didn't matter whether you were so tired, you did not mean for that to happen to your child, you did that.
Yeah. If intent erased responsibility, most fatal car accidents wouldn't be prosecuted. Workplace deaths wouldn't result in charges. Negligence wouldn't exist as a legal concept. Intent matters, but it is not the gatekeeper of accountability. Why do you think, audience, intent is used so often to excuse harm, but rarely used to excuse punishment?
That is a very good question.
So let me ask the question that sits underneath everything we've talked about so far. At what point does the system decide that no one is responsible? And who benefits when that happens? Because death by misadventure doesn't just describe an event, it closes a door.
Yeah.
Last question for this part right here for the audience. If responsibility disappears at the level of language, what chance does it have to exist anywhere else?
That is very true. Whether people realize it or not, language is how we interact with each other. It is how the law determines what is okay. It is how we teach our children to behave.
So all that said, now that we've slowed down and clarified what death by misadventure is actually meant to cover, we need to talk about the part that makes this whole thing start to crack. Because if this were just about a single bad ruling, it would still be upsetting, but it wouldn't be systemic. The real problem shows up when you place this ruling next to other cases and realize rules don't just bend, they contradict each other. And that contradiction tells us something important about what the system values. So before we go any further, ask yourself this. Who do you think the justice system is harder on? People who cause harm or people who are adjacent to harm? Hold that question because we're coming back to it. Let's talk about something that almost never gets public attention. Misprison of a felony. In simple terms, misprison of a felony means you knew a felony occurred, you failed to report it, and you took steps to conceal it or you didn't disclose it when required. Now, here's where things get uncomfortable. There are people, often young, often scared, often with fewer resources, who have been sentenced to years in prison. Not for committing violence, but for knowing something and not acting correctly afterwards.
Yeah.
No physical harm caused by them, no direct action, just proximity, fear, silence, or confusion.
And that is so hard for like our younger generations because they are not teaching them in schools anymore what their like civic duties and responsibilities and constitutional rights. They are out here blind unless we as parents are teaching them.
And for the audience, why do you think silence is treated as more dangerous than recklessness in some cases? Side-by-side comparison. Let's do this. Let's place them next to each other. On one side, a person physically pushes another person. The environment is dangerous. The action introduced force. Someone dies. Ruling, death by misadventure, no criminal accountability. Other side, a person knows something illegal happened. They don't report it. No one dies because of their action. No physical harm caused by them. Result, prison time. Just sit with that. Just let that simmer in your brain and in your heart. Because this isn't about morality anymore. This is about inconsistency. And for the audience, if harm is the metric, why does proximity sometimes carry a heavier sentence than the action?
I would also strongly encourage our audience, if they do want to dig into that, to look into, like, the backgrounds and, like, the other things of these people that were incarcerated and things happened to them that were only in the vicinity and they weren't doing bad things.
Yeah, yeah. When you zoom out, though, a pattern starts to emerge. The system is often less concerned with what physically happened, who was hurt, or how preventable it was, and more concerned with control, compliance, and whether people followed expected procedures afterwards. That means the system isn't always responding to harm, it's responding to disruption.
Yeah.
As an audience, do you think justice systems prioritize restoring harm or maintaining order? This
Do
is
you
where
have
the
examples
Oh yeah,
of why you think that?
Oh yes, I
Mhm.
do. But I'm gonna give time to
Oh
ponder.
no, I was talking to the audience. Like, do you guys have examples of why you think that thing or the other?
Oh yeah,
Like,
please,
what helped you build that opinion?
This is where the misadventure classification becomes dangerous, because when harm is reframed as fate, the system doesn't have to investigate deeply, ask hard questions, or admit failure in prevention or accountability. Misadventure removes friction, and systems love low friction outcomes.
Oh yes.
So, audience, who benefits when an event is labeled inevitable instead of preventable? There's another layer here, and this is where lived experience matters. People who are punished for misprison are often punished to send a message. If you don't cooperate perfectly, this will happen to you. But when someone causes harm, what was that?
I said exactly. Mm-hmm.
But when someone causes harm and that harm is labeled accidental or unavoidable, no such message is sent. Instead, the message becomes, as long as intent is unclear, responsibility is negotiable.
Go ahead.
Those two messages cannot coexist without doing damage. Go ahead.
I would like you guys to really think about this. Why does a white 16-year-old that gets drunk, crashes his car, and ends somebody's life get away with a warning and you're going to learn next time because you were so traumatized, but somebody of a different ethnicity, same age, same whatever, gets arrested, they're all over the newspaper of a drunk driver, slaves, and they are thrown in jail for years and their life ruined for the same exact crime that happened 2 weeks ago.
You're not wrong. So here's another question, audience. Which message do you think shapes behavior more? Fear of punishment or expectation of accountability? The quiet hierarchy of blame. What we're really seeing is a hierarchy. 1. Direct harm with no intent equals minimized. 2. Association with harm equals criminalized. 3. Failure to perform the correct punishment, the correct response equals punished. That hierarchy does not center victims. It centers institutional convenience. What were you saying?
No, I just said,
Audience, if justice were centered on victims, how differently would these cases be handled?
Yes.
This brings us to the point where we have to ask a harder question, not about guilt, but about design. Because if the system were truly corrective instead of punitive, these contradictions wouldn't exist. And that's where we're going next. The last question before I go into the next part is, if a system punishes knowledge more harshly than harm, what does that tell you about its priorities?
Exactly. Our older generations that are watching this will know what I'm talking about, and the younger won't. They used to teach civics, to teach us our rights, to teach us exactly what the law was supposed to do for us and what the law was. And I believe one of the reasons they took it away is because without that knowledge, it is so much easier for them to get away with things because not everybody around knows, hey, no, that's obviously you're breaking the law. Now we're like, that seems wrong, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and before we move forward, there's one question the justice system almost never pauses to ask, and it matters here more than anything else we've discussed so far. What if the person didn't report a crime because they genuinely didn't know a crime occurred? Or because knowing too much would have put their life in danger?
Right? I'm sorry, if I just watch somebody shove somebody else off a cliff or off a ledge or something, I'm not going to, want to say anything because I'm like, I'm next. That's what's going to happen.
The audience, let that sit with you for a minute. If you were in that position, say your spouse was a kingpin and he never let you know any of his business dealings, but when he got caught up in surveillance, they caught you in pictures with him at multiple locations where he had also done deals. So he told them that you knew so that you would go to prison so you couldn't be with another man while he was locked up. Think about that, because that is a lived reality that I personally was in prison with a 18-year-old girl that exact situation happened to.
No.
Life destroyed because somebody said she knew something she knew nothing about. And they had pictures of her being in places where he had done things. Not with her doing anything, not surveillance of her doing anything, not of her being present at the time of things happening. Just surveillance of her being with him at places that at other times illegal things were done. But because he said she knew, that was it.
Yeah. Damn words again.
Because being present at a location is not the same thing as being aware of a crime. And silence under fear is not the same thing as consent. And I need that to stick with people about fear. Because fear triggers the fight or flight, or freeze or fawn. But what I'm trying to say with that is that it takes away your frontal cortex rational processing. You are instinctively reacting. You are not choosing a response.
Let's talk about a very current case where that is very clear to any trauma survivors, like the Diddy case. How so many people are like, how did Kathy not tell anybody? How was blah, blah, blah. That girl was fucking terrified, and she was doing the one thing that she thought would keep her alive. And
that is victim blaming.
Yeah.
That is victim blaming, because that's just another victim.
Yeah.
Clarifying the moral line. There are realities the law often pretends don't exist. People live with abusive partners. People are financially trapped. People are intimidated, threatened, or controlled. People are present without understanding what's happening. People comply out of fear, not agreement. And yet, when accountability is assigned later, the system often retroactively assumes knowledge, intent, and agency, even when none can be proven. So, audience, if someone Sorry, what was that?
That's sadly true.
So, audience, if someone stays silent because speaking up could get them killed, are they morally responsible or are they surviving? Really sit with that. Really put yourself in that position. The double bind. This is where the moral contradiction becomes undeniable, because the system says you should have reported it. But real life says reporting it could have ended my life. So the person is punished not for harm, but for failing to behave like an ideal, fearless version of themselves that only exists in courtrooms.
And this is a reality for people that have jobs that are mandatory reporters. Like, It would be nice to say if you have one of these jobs, oh, just don't mess with dangerous people, just don't do things that are wrong. I'll tell you right now, that's not always a possibility, depending on how your life is.
Oh, it's not. And in fact, most jobs that make you a mandated reporter often put you in perilous situations.
Yes. Yeah, those are some of the places that are telling you, like, hey, I know you're supposed to report, but maybe don't do that if you'd like to keep your job.
Or your life.
Yeah.
So, audience, should justice be based on how people should act in theory or how people actually survive in reality? When we ignore coercion, fear, and lack of knowledge, accountability stops being ethical, punishment stops being just, and outcome stops reflecting reality. And once that happens, the law no longer protects people, it selects them. The last question before I shift. If fear and survival invalidate responsibility in self-defense, why do they suddenly disappear when silence is involved? This is where we need to separate two things the system keeps intentionally blurring: accountability and punishment. Because they are not the same thing. And pretending they are is how we keep getting outcomes like this bullshit.
Yes.
What accountability is supposed to do, in theory, accountability should answer 3 questions. What happened? Who was affected? What prevents this from happening again? But in practice, our system skips the 3rd question almost entirely. Instead, it jumps straight to who can we charge? How hard can we punish them? And how fast can we close the case? And that's how we end up with people in prison for assumed knowledge while others walk free after fatal recklessness. So, audience, if accountability doesn't reduce future harm, what purpose is it actually serving?
Is it actually providing justice, or is it just feeding into a much larger system?
Well, let's get very clear. Death by misadventure should mean bad luck, personal error, or risk someone knowingly took on their own. We already gave examples of that. In all of those cases, the person's own actions created the risk and no one intervened. That's misadventure. On the other hand, the minute anybody intervenes, that classification needs to change. That is no longer misadventure. That is accidental death caused by another person.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it, but I feel like a lot of these people that end up, like, you couldn't have seen your friend on the edge and be like, I think they're gonna survive this 4-story fall. Like,
I understand what you're saying, but I also understand that sometimes people don't fully think through all their actions and accidents do happen. That's why I feel like there should be a separate classification of accidental death, like I said, with involvement of another person, that caused by another person. Because here's where I'm going. Well, first let me ask the audience. If someone else's action is the final trigger, how can we pretend the outcome was purely accidental?
that's how I feel.
But I feel like it should be a separate charge entirely, accidental death from involuntary manslaughter. Because involuntary manslaughter, first of all, has very specific requirements, which accidental death does not meet. Not every fatal mistake also needs prison time. But every fatal mistake involving another person definitely needs responsibility. That responsibility could look like mandatory therapy, risk awareness training, restorative justice with the family, long-term education requirements, and most importantly, financial accountability for burial and medical costs, not punishment for life. Correction for the behavior that killed somebody, and financial coverage for the family that lost everything. Because death is not free. It is not cheap.
God, no. God, no,
And
it's
if
not.
you caused it, even by accident, you should pay for it.
I definitely agree with that. I personally think if they were ever to make a subcategory like you were talking about, it would have to be determined by heavy psychological testing to really figure out what was going through their head and their knowledge of, like, yes, it's going to be permanent. Yes, this is going to hurt other people. Like, and you're still choosing to do this knowing these things maliciously. Or do you honestly think, oh, they're not going to actually get hurt that bad? Or what were your actual thought processes before this happened?
I don't really think that's necessary because that all is part of the after. The action's already done. That we don't, if it doesn't fall under the legal definition of involuntary manslaughter, then it doesn't need prison time. It needs corrective action and education.
Yes. But you are a much more forgiving person than I am.
It's not that I'm more forgiving. It's that I understand we're all human. We all do stupid shit at different times. And sometimes there is really no thought behind it at all. And then when shit goes sideways, you're just like, oh, fuck.
Yes.
We all have those moments.
Yes, you are right.
Some with bigger consequences than others, and that's just the way life works. But if you take a life, even if by accident, you should be accountable for that.
Yeah.
I mean, audience, if a life was lost because of your choice, even unintentionally, should walking away be an option?
No.
That person has lost their life. I want you to really contemplate that. I'm not saying, should you go to prison and have your life ruined? That's not what I'm saying. That's literally why I'm saying that we should have a separate classification that is not punitive, but corrective. Because punitive systems have their own problems. And I'm going to tell you about that too.
Yes. And I understand that line of thinking. I'm just very much of a... I think it would take a special case for me to be like, you shouldn't lose your life because you took somebody else's, even if it was me. Even if I was stupid. Like, I would hope that I would never get drunk and drive and kill somebody, but I believe if I got drunk and drove and I killed somebody, that I deserve to be taken the fuck out. But I don't see anything wrong with the way you believe either. It's just different.
Here's the thing. I believe that you can have your own personal beliefs. It's like how my stance on harming and predatory behavior towards children. I have a very firm stance on it. However, my personal bias and stance should never reflect on what I am proposing for society at large, because what you've gone through and what I've gone through should never reflect what other people are going through and the choices they're making.
Exactly.
That's why I am saying this the way I am.
Yes, and I do understand.
And it actually, it's to protect everyone. It's actually a more protective, a more healing, balanced system. Because here's what people miss. A corrective system doesn't excuse harm. It prevents repeat harm. Because when people are forced to confront consequences, understand risk, and face the human cost of their actions, they don't just serve time, they change behavior. That's different than being punished and put in prison.
See, and I think, honestly, if we did the way we do our justice system, I would probably believe a little bit differently. Because I believe if we actually helped people, we actually educated, we actually got them the help that they needed, they would not go out and reoffend. They would not become callous murderers while they're inside a prison. They would not go back out and be like, well, fuck it, I already did it and I already know, like, the worst of it, so why is it that bad? I believe if we actually help people reform, then I would want more of that for people, but because I know how our justice system is right now, I am very callous about, I think you're going to go in and come out worse.
You're not wrong about that. That is statistically, factually correct. And it's also everything that's wrong with the system.
Yes.
So,
exactly.
audience, would you rather live next to somebody that just served time or someone who understands exactly why their actions can never happen again?
Mm-hmm. And that's documented by psychologists and many other people. It's not just they served their time, they should be better.
Here's the truth no one wants to admit. If we applied accountability consistently, prosecutors couldn't cherry pick cases, careers couldn't be built on win rates, and prisons couldn't function as profit centers. Because a system based on learning and correction doesn't need mass incarceration. So, audience, what would collapse first if justice stopped being about punishment? So, if accountability doesn't require cages and prevention doesn't require destruction, then the real question becomes, why are we still using a system designed to fail?
Ooh, me. They make so much damn money. So damn much money off of the way the system is now. Giving that up.
Here's the proof of why it works, why it can work, and why the U.S. keeps refusing to learn. At this point, someone always asks, okay, but what's the alternative? The answer is simple. Other countries already figured this shit out. They do it actively.
A long time ago.
Not in theory, in practice. Corrective justice isn't new. It's just uncomfortable. There are countries where incarceration is not designed to destroy a person's identity like it is here. Places where prison is structured around rehabilitation, accountability is paired with education, and reentry is treated as part of the sentence, not an afterthought. In some systems, people work their real jobs, maintain their real family relationships, attend therapy and school, and return home on the weekends. The goal isn't isolation. The goal is reintegration.
With more skills and more knowledge than you had going in.
Yeah. So, audience, if the purpose is of justice is public safety, why would we want people to return to society more broken than when they entered?
Yeah, and I know that not everybody knows what prison's like, but there's not a lot of people that come out of it, at least not a little bit more, in some way or another, even if it's just because of what you had to witness.
Every single person that comes out of prison, it is documented that the transition from prison to real life or reality again is the same as a soldier returning from war, shell-shocked, severe PTSD. It's the same fucking thing. You're returning from a war zone, and now you don't know how to act.
Oh?
What these systems understand that ours don't. Corrective systems operate on a principle the U.S. avoids. People are more dangerous when they are disconnected, traumatized, and desperate. So instead of asking, how long should we punish them, they ask, what needs to change so this never happens again?
Yeah.
That single shift changes everything. Everything. Audience, would you rather someone fear punishment or understand the consequences? Like, think about that.
And here's a nifty little way to think about this. We all have our inner children. We all have the kid inside of us, whether you realize you do or not. When you got punished as a kid, especially if you were somebody that was punished repeatedly and harshly, did you start to comply or did you learn how to lie better? Did you learn how to survive and make yourself as invisible as you could to get what you needed in life? Same thing happens to adults when they're put under those extreme situations and circumstances.
Yep. And here's why the U.S. system can't, let's not say can't, won't
Won't.
adopt this model because corrective systems threaten three things. 1, profit. 2, power. 3, plausible deniability. A punitive system fills prisons, sustains private contracts, gives politicians tough on crime talking points. A corrective system reduces incarceration, lowers recidivism, and forces accountability at the institutional level. And that makes people in charge uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Audience, though, if a system works better but earns less, whose interest does punishment actually serve?
Ding, 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 ding.
How this all ties back to the misadventure and accidental death. This is why deaths caused by pranks get waved away. This is why silence under fear gets punished. This is why responsibility is inconsistent, because a system that corrects behavior would have to admit intent isn't the only thing that matters. Harm still occurred, and prevention requires education, not erasure. A corrective system wouldn't ask, "Did you mean to?" It would ask, "What did your actions cause, and how do we ensure it never happens again?"
Yeah.
So, audience, why is intent treated as sacred when outcome is irreversible?
And why has that become okay?
And the cost no one calculates. Every failure to hold someone responsible accountable creates another preventable death, another traumatized family, another person who never learns. And when responsibility disappears, grief multiplies, not just for victims, but for the people who live knowing they caused harm when they never were forced to face it. What kind of justice denies closure to everybody involved?
Right? Because as much as the families need justice and closure and all, like, there's a reason discipline is important and accountability is important, because it literally tells your brain, we did this, but now this is the end of this. We've paid for this and we've learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we talk about reform, this isn't abstract. This is about whose lives matter, whose fear is acknowledged, and whose actions carry consequence. Because a system that can imprison someone for proximity but excuse someone for fatal recklessness is not broken by accident. Just let that sink in for a minute. It's not broken by accident.
As one of my favorite new sayings is the system isn't broken, it's running exactly like it was designed to. We're just now realizing it.
Yeah, that's where I was going. It is broken by design. So if justice were truly about accountability, what would we have to stop protecting? If this episode stirred something in you, anger, discomfort, recognition, that's not a flaw. That was the damn point. Because justice is not supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be honest. And honesty means we stop pretending that intent erases outcome. That silence always equals guilt. And that punishment without correction somehow makes us safer. I need to be really, really clear, because somehow I left it out when I was doing this. There is a very clear distinction that should not be counted in this, and that is self-defense. And for this country, self-defense is one of the messiest, because every state has different laws and everything's different, and depending on where you were and how you were and who you were, it applies differently to you. But reality, biology, factual reality is, if you feel like your life is in danger, you do not have the accountability of your actions, because you are running on survival only. That is the only exception. Like, these people that are being charged for knowing about something, did you stop to find out if they even knew really, or if they were afraid for their life? Because if they were afraid for their life, they couldn't have reacted reasonably. They didn't have frontal lobe processing. Come on.
There's a bunch of states with stand your ground laws and castle laws, and I am in full support of them, because no way are you going to come here and scare me, threaten my child's life or my own, and expect me not to take you out like the threat you have presented yourself as.
We literally teach children, don't start it, but finish it. If we teach this to children, if a child comes into your house and breaks a lamp, we don't tell them, okay, you didn't mean to, so no problem. No, we're like, okay, I know you didn't mean to, but here's the consequences because you still broke it.
Yeah.
Not because we're mean or evil or because we don't love them. No, because we love them, we are teaching them both accountability, and we're also teaching them in a fight or flight situation, don't start it, but you better save yourself. Yeah. But then we expect as adults for that not to apply?
No.
Honestly, it makes me sick thinking about it.
It makes me sick thinking the things that they have justified being, or the things they have not justified being like, no, you should always be able to just take it. I'm not gonna die. Not at the hands of another motherfucker. Not if I have a chance to get away.
No,
and
I'm not either.
Human instinct.
I've said it 100 million times. If it's you or me, it's you. I don't care. It's you.
Yeah.
If you're trying to take me out, bye. Because I'm staying, or at least I'm going to do a damn good job trying to stay.
Right?
If you take me out, it will have been with every ounce of your life.
Yeah. You earned that, motherfucker.
So here's what I want you to do after this episode at home. Ask yourself where you've been taught to accept inconsistency as just how things work. Notice when accountability disappears the moment power gets involved. And stop letting the word accident be used to erase responsibility. If this conversation matters to you, share it. Talk about it. Argue with it. Sit with it. Because systems don't change in silence. They change when people refuse to look away. And who benefits when harm is labeled unavoidable, and who is paying the price? Next week, we're going to start pulling back another layer. Because when accountability fails this badly at the individual level, it doesn't disappear on an institutional level. It fucking scales way the fuck on up. And the Epstein files don't just tell a story about one man. They expose a system that protected, minimized, and looked away repeatedly. If you think misadventure gets used to excuse recklessness, wait till you see what power gets away with when the stakes are higher. That conversation starts next week. So, this one was a heavy one. It's not going to get lighter for the rest of this month. I'm sorry to tell y'all. Because, they dropped the bomb on us yesterday, and that's important to discuss. We've been waiting for this. I think the world's been waiting for this.
And
we're still waiting for a lot
further next week, because otherwise we'll both go on a whole new episode of tangents, and we just can't do that at the end of this.
No. So, remember, rage responsibly.
Rage responsibly.
Bye, guys.
We're also available on Spotify. We said what we said, and we're just getting started. Thanks for listening. Now go rage responsibly. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.